On to our next guest, ladies and gentlemen. John Swinney was appointed Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills in 2016. Now, among his many responsibilities, as some of us know here, and some of us who are visiting from down south and abroad, I will tell you, among his many responsibilities are government strategy, delivering and outcomes across portfolios, resilience, and public service reform. He's also a strong supporter of actions to raise awareness of ACEs and is determined to address childhood adversity across the work of the Scottish Government. Ladies and gentlemen, the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's a great pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I get the toughest slot because I've got to follow Churnside Primary School and the wonderful example they are of Scottish education. So, to those who organised the conference, thank you very much for giving me the toughest gig to follow this afternoon. I'm delighted to be here today and to have the opportunity to express publicly on this platform my warmest thanks to Pauline Scott and to Suzanne Zidike for organising this conference to create an ACE-aware nation in Scotland. And, you know, in all my lengthy involvement in politics, I know how difficult it is to get 2,000 people into one hall at the one time with a lunch break. So it's a logistical nightmare, and they've deployed their energy onto, frankly, something that any sort of self-respecting, rational individual wouldn't do, like organising a conference for 2,000 people with a lunch break on their own, because they're driven by the passionate desire to make sure Scotland becomes an ACE-aware nation, and the government is very grateful to them for the energy they've put into doing all of this. On behalf of, as Deputy First Minister, and on behalf of the people of Scotland, I want to extend the warmest of welcomes to Nadine, because Nadine has made a profound impact on our thinking here in Scotland, and I know she spoke to the conference this morning, we'll be back later on, and also spoke to a session at Hampden Park yesterday. We should maybe get Nadine to come back and speak to the football team as well, and maybe kind of raise performance at Hampden Park, since they're going to be staying there. But the film Resilience has had a profound impact on thinking here in Scotland. And I received a number of invitations from different organisations to see the film. And I wasn't, just because of diary things, I couldn't accept any of them. But I didn't want to just see the film on my own, sitting looking at it on a computer at home or in my office. I wanted to see it in an environment where I could do something about its contents and its message. And what I did was I arranged for a screening of Resilience in St Andrew's House in the government's headquarters in Edinburgh, where I was accompanied by a number of senior civil servants, many of whom are here today, but also by a whole range of our much valued stakeholders who are interested and involved in this area of activity. Indeed, Pauline was with us on that occasion, as were a number of those who are contributing to the discussion today. And I wanted to do it that way because I didn't want us just to screen a film and say, well, that's an important message and all the rest of it, and then do nothing about it. I wanted to screen the film and then for us then to have a discussion as government and stakeholders in the country, as we do regularly and habitually in Scotland, about what are we going to do about what we've just seen in that film. And for that, I want to thank Nadine for the production of that film and for her important work, because it has driven thinking here in Scotland, and the presence of the Resilience film has helped us enormously to sharpen the approach that we take to becoming an ACE-aware nation. So, Nadine, welcome, and thank you very much for your contribution to this debate. Now, one of the reasons why I think we've been able to make some headway on the objective of creating an ACE-aware nation, and I'm not going to stand here and say to you, the job's done, everything's perfect. I think you know me well enough to know that's not the kind of view of the world that I have. But the reason why I think we've been able to make important progress is because the thinking that Nadine has helped us with around ACEs comes on top of existing strands of thinking that have been the focus of policy attention in Scotland for quite a number of years. So when the Getting It Right for Every Child agenda was formulated in Scotland in the early part of the century, 2002-2003, I think it was setting up some of the thinking and the rationale which is then reinforced by the thinking behind the film Resilience. Because the Getting It Right for Every Child agenda was all about putting the child absolutely at the centre of everything that we do and making sure that our public services, our public interventions, the work of our third sector, all of the things that go on in a way to support that child and to enable that child to fulfil their potential within our society. So the Resilience film hasn't required us in Scotland to take a different direction from the one that we were taking. What it has done has been to intensify our pursuit of the Getting It Right for Every Child agenda. Now, in the brief conversation that I had with Nadine beforehand, she asked me a number of very important questions about where we are in Scotland on this agenda. And one of the questions she asked me was, how do you believe you can sustain this policy agenda? And the answer I gave her was that I was confident about us being able to sustain this agenda for, beyond the political cycle. Politicians come and go, they get elected, there's face changes of government, all the rest of it. So how can you overcome the obstacle of the political cycle? And my answer to Nadine was, we overcome that because the GIRFEC agenda was not a product of the government of which I have the privilege to be a member. It was a product of our predecessors. So the government before us did the thinking and the working and consulted with Parliament, and we all agreed the Getting It Right for Every Child agenda was an important agenda for us all to take forward. And therefore, when we came to office in 2007, we didn't just say, well, because we are the new government, we're going to stop everything that was happening beforehand, even though it might have been quite good, and do something else just for the sake of it. What we did was say, well, the Getting It Right for Every Child agenda was something we supported in opposition, so let's continue that agenda, let's intensify it. And then when the thinking behind the Resilience film comes along, let us then refuel the agenda with the extra impetus that this thinking gives us. So the commitment I give to you, and I can't predict the outcome of future elections. I would like to be able to predict the future of elections. I'd love my party to be in power forever. But what I can say to you is that I'm optimistic that this agenda is broadly supported across the political spectrum in Scotland. And what we have to make sure, and you have an involvement in this as interested people in this agenda, to make sure that whatever the political leadership of our country, we remain as a country absolutely focused on getting it right for every child. And a key part of that will be becoming an entrenched, long-term, committed, sustained, ACE-aware nation, because that will be good for Scotland today, tomorrow, and in the future. And that's what I invite you to help us to achieve. Now, for all of that to be achieved, there are two really important principles. For us to become an ACE-aware nation, there are two really important principles that we have got to entrench in our way of working. The first is that we've got to be prepared to work across government, across portfolio, across profession. We have basically got to disrespect all of the boundaries that normally imprison every one of us. Because becoming an ACE-aware nation, tackling the implications of ACEs, will never, ever be achieved only in a compartment by the education system, or by the health service, or by the police, or by the prison service. We will succeed in this mission if absolutely everybody, across all portfolios and all disciplines, plays their part in helping us to become an ACE-aware nation. And I want to let you into a little bit of internal government dynamics about how that plays itself out. A year past August, we were formulating our programme for government. And at page 93, there's a box in it which talks about ACEs and how the government is going to support work to embed our activities to become an ACE-aware nation and to overcome the obstacles of adverse childhood experiences. And it goes on to list about 5 bullet points about the role of the education system and the role of the health service and the role of the police and the role of third sector organisations and all the rest of it. And we're sitting at the Cabinet table finalising this document before it goes to Parliament to be considered. And Michael Matheson, the then Justice Secretary, takes this page of the document and he slips it across the table to me and said to me, if you don't get the education system bought into this, and if the Health Secretary doesn't get the health service bought into this, I'll be picking up the pieces of this in the prison service in the years to come. And that's the blunt reality of all of that. And we accept around the Cabinet table that analysis. And it is absolutely 100% correct. So arising out of that discussion, the showing of the resilience film, I convened a gathering at Bellahouston Academy in March of this year, where we brought together about 100 players within the public and third sectors who are involved in this area of activity around education, health, police, prisons, fire and rescue, everybody across the public sector. And the Health Secretary, the Justice Secretary, the Community Secretary, the Education Secretary were all there. And quite late in the proceedings, I was convening the event, but quite late in the proceedings, the First Minister came as well to join us for the whole of the session. It changed her diary to come to it, because she wanted to make a statement to that whole community that this has the endorsement and the involvement of the political leadership of the country at the most senior level. And we heard outstanding contributions to that discussion on that day, but more importantly, we all agreed that day to that collaborative approach across the policy spectrum to make sure we are successful in taking forward this agenda. So the first important principle of becoming an ACE-aware nation, the founding principle, is we have to accept this is not sitting in some neat little compartment over there called ACEs. It is about everything. That's the starting point across government. The second important founding principle is that we have got to think about, in all that we do, considering either prevention or early intervention. So we have to look for the earliest possible opportunity to try to intervene to overcome the effects and the issues arising from ACEs. We either have to try to prevent them happening in the first place, which would be good, but we have to live in the real world that there will be tough things happen out there for people. We can't stop adversity happening. If we were able to do that, well, we would live in a very different society. But we can do our best to try to minimise the unnecessary adversity that happens to people. And there is some unnecessary adversity that happens to people in our society. And then when adversity happens, that we intervene at the earliest possible opportunity to make that happen. And even although I've met people who've undoubtedly had adverse childhood experiences, they have not been addressed, they have got into difficulty, they have caused trouble, they've committed crimes, they've been incarcerated, and even then, it's not too late to deploy early intervention to try to overcome ACEs. Because although people are in prison, we've got as much duty to try to overcome the implications of adverse childhood experiences amongst them as we have in anyone else in our society. So, even though somebody may be serving a prison sentence, we shouldn't be giving up on people saying, well, we can't possibly overcome your ACEs because you're stuck with them at your age. We've still got to be trying to overcome them at that stage. Now, in a perfect world, it wouldn't have gone as far as that. But we all know that I've had the privilege of meeting people who have, one of the greatest privileges of ministerial life is that you meet people who are prepared to explain to you their life journey, some of it pretty bumpy, and explain it to you so you understand what you've got to do to be successful in your public policy work. And I met a guy, probably in his mid-40s, who was able to trace back, he'd served quite a bit of time in prison, and he was able to trace back to me, for me, a failure to address the fact that he had a communication problem as a child, which was clearly manifesting itself when he was a 2 or 3-year-old, and it had not been addressed, and its failure to address it then led to this and that and the next thing, and before he knew it, he was incarcerated. And that is a total waste of money, because we're getting no productive value out of that individual, whereas if we'd spent £1,000 on speech and language therapy when he was 2, we would have had a very different outcome to that person's life. So, 2 absolutely rock-solid founding principles. We have to work across government, across portfolio, disrespect boundaries is number 1, and number 2 is early intervention and prevention are key. Now, there's sort of 4 tactical approaches the government's taken to advance this agenda in Scotland, and I'll just run through them quickly. First of all, we want to put in place intergenerational support for parents, families and children to recognise the difficulties that individuals face. And a lot of the work that we take forward, whether it's about the introduction of the baby box or the expansion of the health visitor workforce in our country or the expansion of early learning and childcare, is all designed to get into the establishment of home family link workers. I just met a young woman today who is from the William McIlvanney campus in Kilmarnock that I've just visited. I've just come from there just now. Marvellous 21st century state-of-the-art education campus in Kilmarnock. She's working homeschool link work to avoid exclusion from education, so that we actually invest in people who go out of the school to find out, why is this young person not at school? What's happening to them? What are they experiencing? And how can we help them to overcome that? And that's fabulous work to try to make sure that we give support to families. So intergenerational support for families and for children. Secondly, that we've got to try to reduce the negative effects of ACEs, whether that's the work that we undertake through the Scottish Attainment Challenge to try to overcome the barriers that poverty presents of young people being able to pursue their education, or the work that we undertake on anti-bullying, or whether it's about parental involvement in our schools and our education system, or the wider child poverty agenda the government takes forward. All of that is about trying to overcome the negative effects of ACEs. Thirdly, we've got to have a trauma-informed workforce. People have got to be able to see this and recognise it. I saw a marvellous play put on a school in Edinburgh. It was 2 desks on the stage, and these 2 characters came to the chairs. One was a teacher, one was the pupil. The pupil hadn't handed in their homework. The teacher was, why have you not handed in your homework? It's ridiculous. You're late every day. Where's the homework? What's going on? Etc., etc. And then they then left the desks. And the boy went home. And it was chaos and disaster and alcoholism and violence. And the teacher left the desk and thought, I wonder what's going on in his life. And they came back to the desk for part 2, and the conversation was, what's happening to you? What are you living about? It wasn't, where's your homework? It was, is your homework not in because something's not right at home? Completely different conversation of a trauma-informed workforce. And so it's not something that we say, right, I'm sitting here, I'm experiencing this, so I'll now refer this person away over there to the ACEs, whatever we call it, to try and sort it all out. Because if we try and do that, it'll no work. I'm telling you. We all have to be part of that, recognising the symptoms, finding out at the earliest possible moment, what can we do to try to help young people overcome adverse childhood experiences. And fourthly, we've got to increase societal awareness, because if we don't know about this, talk about it, don't recognise it, we'll never get there. It'll all be a mystery tour for all of us. So, 4 very focused approaches: intergenerational support for parents and families, reducing the negative effects of ACEs, establishing a trauma-informed workforce, and increasing societal awareness. And why does all this matter? Well, it matters for a couple of different reasons. And I want to explain to you my 2 perspectives on why it matters. I've been the Education Secretary for 2 years, but I suspect most people will be more familiar with my long service as the Finance Minister of Scotland for 9 years. And once you've been a Finance Minister, you can't stop thinking like a Finance Minister. You're always counting. One of my reasons for thinking why this matters is we just can't afford it as a country. Financially, we can't afford it. We're sending people to jail and spending £44,000 incarcerating them for a year. They're contributing no money into our taxes to pay for those jails or our other public services. And if we'd actually spent £1,000 20 years beforehand, we might have avoided having to spend the 40-odd thousand pound all those years later. And it might sound terribly mercenary of me, but I'm not going to make any apology for it. Somebody's got to pay for things in our society. We need people to be working and paying taxes and contributing to our society. It's a noble objective, but it's essential that we recognise that some people are unable to do that because of the effect of ACEs. So if we sort out the ACEs, we'll have more taxpayers and more ability to contribute to our society. And so that's the mercenary bit of me. The other bit of me is about moral purpose. There's a whole broad sweep of people here in this gathering today. Some of whom will be educators, some will be health service employees, some will be involved in supporting individuals in the third sector, some will be here from the police, some will be here from the prison service. Whatever you've come from, the reason you're here is because you're driven by a moral purpose. Whatever your professional role, you're here because you want to make this country a better place in which our children can grow up. And as a consequence of that, the tackling of ACEs is part of the moral purpose of our country, to make sure that individuals don't have to go through a life of where they are imprisoned, literally, or sometimes metaphorically, by the consequences of ACEs, which we can help people to overcome. When we as a government sat down and reviewed our national performance framework, we put in this outcome that we're trying to achieve, that we grow up loved, safe and respected so that we realise our full potential. I have never, ever sat round the cabinet table until this summer and approved a document that put the word loved into it. Might be not a kind of, it's not a very governmental word, but it should be, and thank goodness it is now. And that's really the point on which I want to close my remarks today. There's the necessity of all of this, of the work that's brought us together today, that Pauline and Suzanne have organised us to come and to reflect on today, is part of the moral purpose of our country, to make sure that all of our citizens are able to realise their full potential, that they all grow up loved, safe and respected in our society and able to realise their full potential. And becoming an ACE-aware nation, embedding this thinking in all that we do, in whichever part of our of the workforce that we're involved, and that we're prepared to, most importantly, look beyond our little compartment within the public services and work with others in common purpose to overcome some of these issues, then we will actually be able to look ourselves in the mirror and say, well, actually today we did a lot of good work to make sure we grow up loved, safe and respected and able to fulfil our potential in a 21st century Scotland that is an ACE-aware nation. Thank you very much, and all good wishes to you. Thank you.
John Swinney, Deputy First Minister, thank you.